Sometimes a game goes through so much development drama, branding confusion, or just plain rethinking that it ends up launching with a completely different name than it started with. Whether it was a publisher's decision or a last-minute pivot, these are games that almost had totally different titles. And in some cases, you've probably heard of the old name without realizing it. So here are 10 games that might change their names just before release. BioShock. You might know BioShock as this atmospheric, dystopian underwater shooter. What you might not know is that early in development, it was actually called System Shock 3. Yeah, BioShock was originally pitched as the spiritual successor to System Shock 2, and for a long time it was straight up being developed under that name. But 2K didn't own the System Shock IP, and Ken Levine eventually leaned into making something that was inspired by System Shock, but set in its own universe. Thus, BioShock was born, and honestly, it was the right call. Resident Evil. In Japan, the series is still called Biohazard, which is honestly a pretty metal name. But when Capcom brought the first game to the US, there was one big problem. The name Biohazard was already taken by a band and a DOS game, so the US team literally held an internal contest to rename it. Resident Evil won because most of the game takes place in a mansion, and hey, it sounds spooky. It's also one of those names that didn't make total sense at the time, but ended up becoming iconic because of the series. Half-Life. Before Valve settled on the now iconic name Half-Life, the game was briefly referred to as Rainbow or Quiver. Why Quiver? Well, it was a reference to a military base from Stephen King's The Mist, which partly inspired the game's setting. But Quiver didn't exactly scream sci-fi shooter with dimensional rifts and crowbars, so the team pivoted to Half-Life, a reference to radioactive decay. It's clinical, mysterious, and honestly just cool. Perfect fit for a game that's secretly about the collapse of reality. Overwatch. Overwatch was Blizzard's first big new IP in years, but it actually rose from the ashes of a completely different game. Project Titan. Titan was going to be a next-gen MMO, basically World of Warcraft 2.00, but it was canceled internally after years of dev hell. Instead of scrapping everything, Blizzard salvaged the assets and ideas to build Overwatch, a much smaller, tighter multiplayer shooter. The name Overwatch was chosen late in the process, and it honestly just works. It sounds elite, action-y, but not too edgy. Titan was cool, but this name change probably saved the franchise. Prey. 2017. This one's a mess. The original Prey from 2006 had nothing to do with the 2017 Prey reboot. In fact, the 2017 version by Arcane Studios was originally not even called Prey. It was just its own sci-fi survival sim. But Bethesda decided to slap the Prey name on it anyway because they owned the trademark and figured it might help with marketing. Developers at Arcane were reportedly not thrilled with the name change. Still, despite the confusion, the game's great, and the name kinda stuck, even if it makes no sense. Sleeping Dogs. You ever heard of a game called True Crime Hong Kong? That was Sleeping Dogs. At least originally. It was meant to be a revival of the True Crime series by Activision. But the project got canceled halfway through development. Then Square Enix swooped in, picked it up, and rebranded it as Sleeping Dogs, which somehow made it feel like its own gritty, standalone thing. Honestly, the name change helped distance it from the mediocre True Crime legacy, and now Sleeping Dogs is remembered as a cult classic open-world crime game. Doom 2016. Before it became the fast, brutal reboot we know today, Doom 2016 was internally known as Doom 4. It was originally a more grounded military-style shooter. Think Call of Doom. But the devs weren't feeling it. They rebooted the reboot, amped up the violence, brought back the speed, and dropped the number altogether. Just Doom. Simple, loud, angry. The name change symbolized a return to roots, and man, it delivered. Mass Effect Andromeda. Believe it or not, Mass Effect Andromeda wasn't always supposed to have that subtitle. Internally, it was just referred to as Kasat Mass Effect 4, or sometimes even Mass Effect Contact, referencing humanity's first interactions with aliens in the Andromeda galaxy. But BioWare wanted to distance it from the original trilogy and make it feel like a new start, so they went with Andromeda. Whether or not that worked depends on who you ask. Star Fox Adventures. Okay, a bit of a curveball. This game started development as Dinosaur Planet, a totally new IP for the N64 made by Rare. But Nintendo decided to pivot mid-dev and slap Star Fox on top of it. They changed the protagonist, added Fox Fox McCloud, and it launched as Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube. The original vision of a fantasy sci-fi adventure was kind of buried, but the name change made it part of an established franchise. Whether that helped or hurt the game? Up for debate, but it's one of the more drastic late-stage name swaps in gaming history. Final Fantasy. Here's a legend for you. Final Fantasy was supposedly named that because it was Square's final game before bankruptcy. That's actually not entirely true. It was a make-or-break moment, but the original name was almost Fighting Fantasy, until they realized that name was taken by a popular tabletop RPG series. So they switched to Final Fantasy, and the rest is, well, literally decades of games that are anything but final. Irony's a beautiful thing. So yeah, game names change all the time behind the scenes, but sometimes those last-minute switches are the reason a game becomes iconic in the first place. A cool name sticks in your head. A bad one? It's forgotten instantly. Got any others we missed? Drop them in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.